Hi everybody. So I wanted to make a video presentation about theme. What is theme? Why is it important? We're going to talk about it a lot in our class. It's something you're going to hear all of your English teachers talk about, all of your college English professors, literary scholars. Theme is kind of the big daddy of literary devices. It's the big one. And when I say that, I don't mean that it's the hardest one. It's not. But it's the one that you really need to be able to get right. It's the one that we need to have a solid foundation in. So I wanted to give you a kind of overview of what theme is and how it needs to look for my class and really all English classes. So let's start with what a theme is. Number one, every piece of fiction literature has a theme. So when we talk about literature, we're going to talk about in a minute the difference between fiction and nonfiction, but there's always a theme if it's a fictional piece of literature. A theme is a universal message expressed directly, but most often indirectly, in a piece of literature. And by the term universal, what I mean is it's not specific only to that piece of literature, it can be applied to real life. So now let's look at the difference between theme versus main idea. You may have heard teachers use these terms, both of these terms, and some people try to use these terms interchangeably, but they're not technically the same thing. They're connected, but they're not the same. So a theme is for a fictional piece of literature. So this is something like a novel, a short story, a poem, something that the author has made up. They've crafted these characters and these stories and the events are made up. So fiction literature has a theme. On the other side of the literature world, we have nonfiction. And nonfiction is these informational pieces of literature. So your articles, your essays, biographies, informational websites, these are nonfiction pieces and they have a main idea. So they're similar in that they're both the message of the text, but theme and main idea are different because main idea is normally more direct and more obvious because they're not trying to use symbolism and character development to reveal the main idea. They're going to come out and state the main idea. If you're on a website about how to flush out your carburetor in your car, they're going to state, in order to flush out the carburetor of your car, you need to do X, Y, and Z. So it'll be very direct. Theme, normally not direct, which is what some students find frustrating about theme. So let's talk about how do I identify a theme. There are 4 steps. I need you to be solid on these 4 steps. The first thing is, what is the topic of the text? These are normally one-word topics. And some people think that the topic is the theme, but that is not the case. Please hear me. I have feelings about this. A topic is not a theme. It's not. It will not work as a theme. So topics include things like love, friendship, loss, personal identity. These are topics. You need to start with the topic. You need to know the topic in order to get to the theme. So that's step 1. Step 2, how do we see this topic showing up in the text? Which characters are dealing with this topic or issue, and what is their experience with this issue? What's happening with this issue? Third step, what is the author trying to say about this topic? So if it's friendship, what's the author trying to say about friendship? If it's personal identity, what are they trying to say? This is usually indirectly developed through characters' choices, character development, and symbolism. A theme has to take a stance on a topic, and it has to be the author's stance. This may not be aligning with your view or stance on the topic. Like if if the topic is love, maybe the theme is love can corrupt an individual and destroy them. That may not be your view. Maybe you think that love uplifts and enlightens who you are. So your view may not align with the author's stance, but that's not the point. The point is to be able to identify a theme of that piece of literature, even if it doesn't run totally true to your view of that topic. So once you've decided what the author is saying about that topic, now we're ready to create the thematic statement, which is a theme. All right, so a thematic statement. First of all, in your theme, you cannot have any specific characters' names. You don't need the title of the text. You don't need the author's name. A theme, remember, is universal. We want to remove those little details that are specific just to this one piece of literature and make it more universal, like a message that could be applied to life. Now, you may include your theme in a sentence like, in The Great Gatsby, comma, the theme is, and then you state your theme, your thematic statement. But within the thematic statement will not be any details or characters' names or the title of your text. So this is where we get our thematic statement, and it needs to be that, again, that universal message that has to be supported by the text. And it should not be a vague cliche. So it shouldn't be love conquers all. Well, that's a vague cliche. It doesn't really say anything. It's not very enlightening. We need to make them a little more specific and directed than that. So let me show you how we do this. Let me give you some examples of pieces of literature that you're familiar with that I can show you this process. So, Little Red Riding Hood. Many of you may have heard this story as a child, some of you may not have. I have posted this presentation on Canvas, and it's in our class information module at the very top, class information. So if you want to go and watch this video, it's a 5-minute video, which retells the story of Little Red Riding Hood. You absolutely can. I would encourage that if you are not familiar with this story. Or if you just want to reference back to this presentation at any time without the video, just the PowerPoint, it's there on Canvas under the class information module. But just to recap, real quick 30-second summary of Little Red Riding Hood. There's a little girl named Little Red Riding Hood. She wears a red hood. She goes into the forest, through the forest to her grandmother's house to deliver her some food. Grandmother's sick. Her mom says, "Here, take this basket of food to your grandma." Little Red Riding Hood, she's been on this path through the forest many times before, but as she's leaving the house, her mother says, "And remember, stay on the path and don't talk to strangers." You know, lots of mother wisdom. Stay on the path and don't talk to strangers. And of course, Little Riding Hood says, "Okay, Mom," and she sets off. Along the way, she wanders off the path because she sees in some versions of the story, some berries or some flowers she wants to pick for her grandmother. So she wanders off the path a little bit. In the process of that, she meets the big bad wolf. They talk. She says, "I'm on my way to my grandmother's house." The big bad wolf is like, yummy. Oh, and the lights have cut off. Hang on a second. Hello? Hello? Oh, they're back. Okay, great. Real professional here. Okay. So he runs off and he's like, "Ooh, I can eat two juicy humans, so I'm going to go to grandma's house." He goes to grandma's house. He finds grandma's house, eats grandma. Poor grandma. Swallows her whole. And gets in her bed, dresses as grandma, waiting for Little Red Riding Hood. He's like in her cap and her glasses, and he's like all snuggled up, waiting for Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood comes in. She is a little bit suspicious of the wolf. He looks a little different. You know, if you watch the video, she says things like, "Mommy, not mommy, Grandma, what big eyes you have, what big teeth you have." And then he eats Little Red Riding Hood. And then after Little Red Riding Hood and Grandma have been eaten, a hunter is coming along in the forest and he hears Little Red Riding Hood scream. He rushes in. In some versions of the story, he cuts the wolf open and Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood emerge from his stomach. In some versions of the story, he shakes the wolf upside down and Little Red Riding Hood and Grandma fall out of the mouth of the wolf. whichever version you prefer, the more violent and bloody one or the not. So now let's talk about theme of this story. So, what's the topic of the text? Number one, text can often have multiple themes. So here I'm just focusing on one of the possible topics and themes. One of the topics is youthful curiosity. Little Red Riding Hood, she wanders off the path, she speaks to the wolf when she's not supposed to. How does this topic show up in the text? Little Red Riding Hood goes into the woods, doesn't listen to her mother's advice. Her curiosity and naive, youthful ways lead to her and her grandmother almost getting killed. Okay, so that's what happens, literally what happens in the story. Number three, what is the author trying to say about this topic of youthful curiosity? He's trying to say young people, like Little Red Riding Hood, should listen to those with more wisdom than themselves or the world represented by the big bad wolf could metaphorically swallow them up. Now we're going to turn that into a thematic statement. Remember, we need to remove all character names and specifics from the story, those details that are specific only to that story, and make it more universal. The universal version would be young people should listen to those with more experience and wisdom, or the world could be a very dangerous and unforgiving place. Good message. You may not agree with it, and I do think there's something to be said for youthful curiosity being a good thing. It's how we learn. But the message of this story is listen to your mama. Okay? Now, let's talk about a literature piece that you all read as freshmen, Romeo and Juliet. So, what's the topic of the text? Number one, there are multiple topics of Romeo and Juliet and multiple themes, but we're going to focus on the topic of prejudice, in particular, the prejudice between the two families, the Montagues and the Capulets. How do we see this topic of prejudice? Two young people, Romeo and Juliet, marry in secret and ultimately die by their own bad decisions because of the prejudice and hatred between their two families in this long running feud. That's what happens in the story. Now, to get to the stance of the author, what is the author trying to say? He is saying, Shakespeare is saying, prejudice between the Montague and Capulet families results in the loss of the things that they care about most, which is their children, Romeo and Juliet. So then, okay, we need to think about, okay, if I take Romeo and Juliet out of the equation and I'm focusing here on prejudice leading to destruction and loss, what thematic statement is being created there? The thematic statement is prejudice destroys the people creating the prejudice, the people that hold the prejudice, and those around them. So ultimately, prejudice is poison and destroys those that are prejudiced. This is universal. This could be applied to lots of different pieces of literature. This could be applied to life. We could see this very relevant to today. That is a thematic statement. That's what I need you to get to. These universal messages that the text is presenting. Remembering and keeping in mind that pieces of literature are going to have multiple themes. You have to pick a topic and then go down the path of that topic and get to that theme. That's how we really dive into pieces of literature. So let's recap. A theme must always be a full statement, not a one-word topic. If I preach anything, it is this. If there is any pet peeve in my teaching life, it is me asking a student, what's the theme of this text? And they say, love. They are wrong. And it hurts me. Has to be a full statement. It should show the author's stance or message on the topic. Okay, well, if the topic's love, what's the author trying to say about love? And it should be universal, not containing any of the characters' names or the name of the text within the thematic statement. We need to pull those details out of there once we've figured out what the author's trying to say. And again, may not align with your views, maybe completely different from your views. But that's why we read. That's why we identify themes. That's why we look at the messages, because ultimately, reading literature is not just about things agreeing with our views, it's about learning. If you have any questions about this, refer back to the PowerPoint, refer to this presentation. or let me know what I can do to help.